When the wild black cow came popping out of a thicket of mesquite and chaparral, she was on them and had gored Dietz's horse badly in the flank before the rangers even knew what kind of beast they were dealing with. The horse squealed and fell over, throwing Dietz almost under the cow, whose horn tips were red with the horse's blood. The cow lowered her head when Call and Gus shot her, firing almost at the same time. The bullets knocked the cow to her knees but didn't kill her. Even on her knees she tried to go for Dietz. It took a bullet to the head to kill her. Dietz was shaking as much from surprise as from fright. His horse gushed blood from its torn flank. "My horse dying," Dietz said, stunned. "Well, where'd she come from?" P.I. asked. All he could remember was that a black streak with short, shiny horns came popping out of the brush. He had had no time to make precise observations. "She came out of that," Augustus said, pointing to what seemed to be an impenetrable thorny brush. The mesquite and chaparral grew out above a solid floor of green prickly pear. "Well, maybe she had hydrophobia," Stove Jones volunteered. "I've lived with cows and such all my life, but I've never seen a cow charge a bunch of men like that." "Just be glad it wasn't one of them tough little black bulls," Lee Hitch said. "One of them little black bulls would have done for about half of us." "You can't kill a bull with no pistol bullet," he added, "not even with 10 pistol bullets." A mile or two farther, Dietz was now riding double with Jake Spoon, who had the stoutest horse. They came upon 3 of the small black bulls Lee Hitch had described. Everyone in the troop drew their rifles, expecting to have to defend themselves, but the bulls were content to paw the earth and snort. Then, just as they were about to stop for coffee and a bit of bacon, a second cow came shooting out of the brush behind them. This time the rangers were primed, but even so it took 3 rifle shots to bring the cow down. In mid-afternoon it happened a third time. A red cow came charging directly at them, breathing froth and bellowing. All the rangers shot this time, and the cow went down. Call, though profoundly startled by the violent behavior of the wild South Texas cows, held his counsel, meaning to talk the development over with Augustus privately when they camped. Gus McCrae couldn't wait for a private parley. They were scarcely south of San Antonio and had just been attacked 3 times with the loss of 1 horse. They had seen no ranches or ranchmen who might advise them on the bovine behavior they were encountering. The rangers were jumpier now than they would have been if they'd been crossing the Comancheria. In the space of an afternoon they had come to fear cattle more than they feared Indians. And it was the cattle of the country, hundreds of them, that they were supposed to round up and deliver to Mexico. "This is pointless traveling," Gus said. "How are we going to deliver 1,000 cattle of that old bandit if we have to shoot every damn cow we see?" Call accepted the point. It was obvious they had been presented with a difficult mission. "There must be tamer cattle down here somewhere," he said. "There's ranches down this way, big ranches. They ship cattle to New Orleans regular, I hear. The boats come to Matagorda Bay. They don't shoot every cow. There's got to be cowboys down here who know how to handle this stock." The rangers listened in silence, but his words made little impression compared to their fresh memories of the mad, frothing cows. "Livestock ain't supposed to be this hostile," Stove Jones commented. "We're Indian fighters, Woodrow," Augustus pointed out. "Indian fighters and bandit chasers. We ain't vaqueros. If I tried to go into one of them thickets after a cow, I'd be lucky not to get scratched to death. We'd just as well try to deliver 1,000 deer. At least deer don't come charging at you. That damn governor's betrayed us again," he added in disgust. Call couldn't really disagree. Governor Pease had given them a flowery letter to show to the ranchers in South Texas. The letter bound the state of Texas to compensate the ranchers for cattle sufficient to make a herd of 1,000 head. There was no mention, however, of a price per head. When Call pointed this out to Governor Pease, the governor had merely shrugged. "Our South Texans are patriotic men," he said. "They'll be glad to let you take a few head of stock if it'll get our hero back. Speak to Captain King," he added. 2 harried clerks were following him around at the time, hoping to get his attention. "Captain Richard King. He'll help you. I expect that goddamn old black bandit has stolen at least that many cattle from him already." "Where do we find Captain King?" Augustus asked. "I've never met the man." "Why, just ask, Captain McCrae, just ask," Governor Pease said. "Captain King is well known along the coast." The governor's office was bustling that day. Besides the clerks and an army man or two, there were 3 benches packed with legislators, all of them evidently hoping for an audience with the governor. As a lot, they looked dusty and drunken. "Look at them ramshackly senators," Augustus said as they left the office. "Maybe we ought to change jobs, Woodrow. We could make laws instead of enforcing them." "I can barely read," Call reminded him. "I'd be a poor hand at making laws." "Why, you wouldn't need to read," Gus said. "We could hire a clerk to do the scribbling. All it takes to make laws is good sense. I could probably make better laws than that whole bunch sitting in there half drunk." "Maybe," Call said. "Maybe not." Governor Pease handed them the letter and sent them away. As they left, several of the legislators were attempting to crowd in his door. Now, faced with the fact that they were barely out of sight of the Alamo and had already had to shoot 3 cows, Call remembered the governor's advice. "I expect we better try and find Captain King," Call said. "Maybe he'll want to lend the state of Texas some vaqueros for a week or 2. "I don't know, Woodrow," Gus said. "When I'm given a job that's downright impossible, my practice is to find a whorehouse and stay in it until my funds run out." "We don't need to find a whorehouse, we need to find a ranch house," Call said. "This is Captain Skull we're trying to rescue. Captain Skull led us for quite a few years and got us out of plenty of hard spots. Now he's in a hard spot and we've got to do the best we can to bring him back." "Well, the fool would walk off to Mexico," Augustus said. He reloaded his rifle and kept a wary eye on the thickets as they passed them. The next day they did find a ranch house, but there was no one there except 3 women folks, some babies and small children, and 2 old Mexican men who had been left to do the chores. A lanky woman with a baby at her breast and 2 toddlers clinging to her skirts just looked unhappy when asked where the menfolk were. "They're off branding cattle," she said. "I expect they're south. They've been gone 3 weeks. I've been looking for 'em back, but they ain't here." "South's a big place," Augustus remarked. The woman just smiled a tired smile. "It's a brushy place, too. You'll find that out once you leave here," she said. "I got goat and I got frijoles. You won't get much except goat and frijoles, not in this part of the country." The men ate outside at a long table shaded by a great mesquite tree whose limbs seemed to spread over an acre. The woman who greeted them was named Hannah Fogg. She had a pretty younger sister who helped with the serving. Though the younger sister was shy as a deer, Gus did get her to reveal that her name was Peggy. Gus stole several glances at her during the meal and lingered over his coffee so he could steal several more. As the men ate, Augustus began to notice children peering out shy as mice, one under the porch, another behind a bush, 2 more who had managed to climb the big tree. 2, at least, were under the wagon. "Why, there's a passel of children here," he said to Peggy. It was an excuse to speak to her. "Are all these little tykes Mrs. Fogg's?" But Peggy ducked her head and wouldn't say. Hannah Fogg was not lying about the difficulties of the country south of a ranch house. For a day and a half more the rangers zigged and zagged in a southerly direction, proceeding from little clearing to little clearing. They were seldom long out of sight of cattle, but no more cows charged. These cattle fled like deer the moment they saw the riders. In the afternoon of the 2nd day they heard the sound of men working and came upon the rancher Denton Fogg and his branding crew, which numbered more than 20 vaqueros. The cattle were held in a large clearing. Ropers slid into the herd and soon came out dragging the animal to be branded. Denton Fogg himself, drenched in sweat and lugubrious in appearance, applied the iron himself. He was not happy to be interrupted in his hot work by a party of Texas Rangers with a letter from the governor asking for a donation of cattle to be driven into Mexico in return for Inish Skull. He did read the letter, though, holding it carefully so his sweat wouldn't drip on it. "This is a piece of worthless foolery, sir," he declared, handing the letter back to Call. "The Mexicans steal half our cattle anyway, and Ed Pease does nothing about it. Now he wants us to give him 1,000 more. No thank you, sir, not my cattle." Call didn't like the man's tone. "He's not asking you to give anything," he pointed out. "The state will pay you for your cattle." "If the state intended to pay for the cattle, it should have provided you with cash money," the rancher said. "Have you got cash money, sir?" Augustus didn't care for the man's tone either. "We're in a hurry to rescue our captain," he said. We couldn't wait for a bunch of money to be gathered up. Don't you even trust the state of Texas?" "Nope, not the state and not Ed Pease either," Denton Fogg replied. "I wouldn't give either one of them a cow, but I will sell cattle for cash on the barrelhead. Come back with the money and I can have 1,000 head ready for delivery within the week." With that, he walked off and picked a hot iron out of the branding fire. "The fool, I feel like shooting him," Augustus said. "We can't shoot a man just because he doesn't want to give away his cattle," Call said. He was not without skepticism about the state's willingness to pay for the cattle. "Well, he's out here branding every cow he can catch," Augustus pointed out. "Who said he could take these cattle?" "I guess that's just how you build up a ranch," Call said. "The cattle belong to the man who gets to them first." "Hell, we could be ranchers ourselves then," Gus said. "We could hire a few ropers and buy some branding irons and get to work. Pretty soon we'd be big livestock men, too." "Where'd we put the cattle once we branded them?" Call asked. "We don't own any land. We don't even own the horses we're riding. All we own are our guns and our clothes. And the saddles," he added. "We do own our saddles." The comment depressed Augustus to an unusual degree. He liked to think of himself as prosperous, or at least prospectively prosperous. But the fact was he was just short of being a pauper. All he owned was 3 guns, a fairly well-made saddle, and some clothes. He had no house, no land, no wife, no livestock. He had ridden all day in the blazing sun through thorny country, threatened by dangerous bovines and possibly even wild Indians, and for what? A paltry salary that would scarcely see him through a month of whoring and imbibing. "I say we quit the Rangers," he said abruptly. "There's a fortune in cattle down here in this brush, and we're letting fools like that one beat us to it." "If you want to get rich ranching, you'll have to work as hard as that fella Fogg. I doubt, myself, that you'd enjoy working that hard," Call said. He rode over to where Denton Fogg was working. Smoke rose from a brand he had just slapped on a large yearling. "Do you know a man named Richard King, Captain King?" Call asked. "I know him," Fogg said, but did not continue. He moved on to the next yearling while the iron was still hot enough to impress a brand. "Well, would you know where we could find him?" Call said. "The governor thought he might advance us the cattle we need." At that, Denton Fogg stopped dead. He looked at Call for a moment and smiled. He even slapped his leg in amusement. "Dick King give up 1,000 cattle?" he said. "Dick King didn't get what he's got by giving away cattle." "He wouldn't be giving them, sir," Call said, trying his best to curb his impatience. "The state will pay him. I'd appreciate it if you would just tell me where I can find him." "I don't keep up with Dick King," Denton Fogg said, still amused. "There's a fella in Lonesome Dove that knows him. You might ask him." Before he had quite worked through his amusement, he was off to the nearest branding fire to select a fresh iron. "Is Lonesome Dove a place?" Call asked. "I confess I'm not familiar with it." "You don't seem to be familiar with anything, Captain," Denton Fogg told him. "This is branding season. Every cattleman who's got any sense is off branding every animal he can get his rope on. Dick King's branding like the rest of us. I wish I had as many cattle as he does, but I don't, and I never will if I have to stand here all day giving directions to Texas Rangers. Just go due south to the Rio Grande and turn left. You'll eventually come to Lonesome Dove. There's a man there named Wands who might know where Dick King and his men are branding." "Let's go," Call said to the troop. "That man's too busy branding cattle to bother with us." "The fool, I'd arrest him if there was a jail nearby," Augustus said. "No, he's not a criminal. Let's go," Call said. For a moment he keenly missed Long Bill Coleman. Though not a professional tracker, such as famous shoes, Long Bill had a good instinct for routes, and what they needed just then was to hold a true route south to the Rio Grande. But it was more than Bill's usefulness that Call missed. The man had been reassuring company, and a frontiersman whose opinion was always useful to have. The thought that he would never have it again made Call low-spirited for a time. If they were lucky enough to strike another ranch house, he meant to try and hire an old vaquero to guide them through the brush. "I have a notion to go back and marry that fella's sister-in-law," Augustus said. "Being married to her'd be better than having this goddamn brush scratch your eyes out." "It's odd to be traveling without Billy Coleman, ain't it?" Call said. "It's first time since we took up rangerin' that Billy ain't been along." Augustus started to agree, but before he could speak, memory rose in him so powerfully that he choked on his words. There was no more Long Bill to ride with. Memories of the missions they had been on together passed through his mind in a vivid parade. But then, to his dismay, the parade was interrupted by images of Clara. One second he would be remembering the tall, lanky man, white with dust, on their march as captives across the Jornada del Muerto, but then it would be Clara, smiling, waiting for him on the back porch of the Forsythe store in her pretty gingham dress. Clara, laughing, teasing, kissing. She had grown a little fuller in the bosom over the years, but otherwise she had been the same girl, from the moment in the muddy street when he had kissed her for the first time until he had bidden her goodbye in the morning mist behind the same store only a few weeks ago. Clara hadn't gone where Bill was. It had already occurred to him that, life being the dangerous business that it was, she might be a widow someday. But by then his own life might have ended, or he might be in jail or in a war somewhere. Anyway, even if Clara were once more to be free, she might turn him down again as she just had. "Why would the man hang himself, Woodrow?" Augustus asked, trying to force his mind back to the original topic. "I know it's best not to think about it, but I can't stop thinking about it," he went on. "There are times at night when I'd give a year's wages just to ask Billy one question." "Well, but he's gone where wages don't help you," Call said. "The best thing is just to try and do the job we have to do." "I doubt we can do this job. Where are we going now?" Gus asked. "To the Rio Grande," Call replied. "To the Rio Grande, and then what? Is Captain King a fish?" Gus asked. "No, but there's a town there where we might be able to find him," Call said. "At least I guess it's at a town." "Well, if it's a town, is it on a map? Does it have a name?" Gus asked impatiently. "Is it on this side of the river, or is it an island, or what?" "It's probably a town," Call said. "There's a saloon there owned by a man named Wands. I think he's a Frenchman." "Oh, well, if it's got a saloon, let's go," Augustus said. "In fact, let's hurry. We'll give the saloon a thorough inspection. Then we'll worry about Captain King. What's the name of this place?" "Lonesome Dove. That's its name," Call said. The captives, 3 men and a woman, were brought in a little after sunrise in an ox cart. Munoz, the bandit Ahumado had assigned to do the job Tudwall once did, ambushed them in their fine coach 3 days to the east. All their finery, rings, watches, and the like he put in a little sack for Ahumado to inspect. The first thing the old man did, before he so much as glanced at the captives, was take the sack from Munoz and carry it to his blanket. He emptied the sack and carefully inspected every item before he turned his attention to the prisoners, all of whom were large and fleshy, as hidalgos and their women tend to be, and all of whom, with good reason, were terrified. Skull watched the proceedings from his cage, shielding his eyes with his hands. On days when they tied him to the skinning post, his vision became a blur. He could distinguish motion and outlines, but not much else. The rains had stopped and the sun was blinding, but Ahumado only now and then tied him to the skinning post. Often he would be left for 3 or 4 days in his cage. When free to shade his eyes, his vision gradually cleared. Also, to his puzzlement, Ahumado instructed the women to feed him well. Every day he was given tortillas, frijoles, and goat meat. Ahumado himself ate no better. Skull suspected that the old man wanted to build him up for some more refined torture later, but that was just a guess and not one that impeded his appetite. "Live while you're alive, Bible and sword," he told himself. He observed that from time to time the black vaquero was racked with coughing, now and then bringing up a green pus. It was enough to remind Skull that the old bandit was mortal too. He might yet die first. That was not a thought likely to bring comfort to the fat new captives. As soon as Ahumado had inspected the booty, he had the 4 prisoners lined up in the center of the camp. He did not speak to them or question them. He just made them stand there through the hot hours of a long day. The people of the village stared at them as they went about their work. Vaqueros or pistoleros who rode in from time to time stared at them. Skull judged the captives to be gentry of some sort. Their dusty garments had once been expensive. Provincial gentry, perhaps, but still from a far higher sphere than the peasants who peopled the camp. The prisoners were used to being pampered. They spent their lives sitting, eating, growing fatter. They were unaccustomed not merely to being prisoners, but to being required to stand up at all. They were too scared to move, and yet they longed to move. They were offered neither food nor drink. Munoz, a thin man with a pocked face, was clearly proud of his catch. He stood close to them, waiting for Ahumado's order. The standing was a torture in itself, Skull observed. In the afternoon, the woman, desperate, squatted and made water. She was well concealed behind heavy skirts, but still Munoz laughed and made a crude joke. Later, the three men made water where they stood, in their pants. Skull watched Ahumado. He wanted to know what the old man would do with his prize catches. The old skinner, Goyeto, sat beside him, clicking his finely sharpened knives, one of them the knife that had taken off Skull's eyelids. A little before sundown, trembling with fatigue, the woman passed out. She simply fell face down, in a faint, Skull supposed. Ahumado did not react. Munoz had just filled his plate with food. He went on eating. A few minutes later, the three men were prodded at knife point to the edge of the pit of snakes and scorpions and pushed in. The bottom of the pit was in darkness by this time. The captives had no idea how deep the pit was. They were merely led to the edge of a hole and pushed off the edge. All of them screamed as they fell, and two of them continued screaming throughout the night. One of the men screamed that his leg was broken. He pleaded and pleaded, but no one listened. The peasants in the camp made tortillas and sang their own songs. Skull decided that the third captive must have broken his neck in the fall. There were only two voices crying out for help. In the morning, when Ahumado and Goyeto went to look in the pit, Skull heard the old skinner complaining. "I thought you were going to let me skin one of them," he said. Ahumado ignored the complaint. He usually ignored Goyeto, who complained often. He stood on the edge of the pit, looking down at the captives and listening to them beg him and plead with him. Then he returned to his blanket. When an old woman brought Skull a little coffee and 2 tortillas, he asked her about the men in the pit. He had noticed several of the women peeking in. "Is one of the men dead?" he asked. "Si, dead," the old woman said. The woman who fainted lay through the night in the place she had fallen. It had grown cold. Skull noticed that someone had brought her a blanket during the night. She was not tied. After the sun had been up a while, the woman rose and hobbled hesitantly over to one of the little campfires. The poor women of the camp made a place for her and gave her food. She thanked them in a low voice. The women did not respond, but they allowed her to sit by the fire. Ahumado took no further interest in her. A week later, when all 3 of the men in the pit were dead, the woman was still there, unmolested, eating with the women of the camp. When Blue Duck saw that his father was angry, he thought it might be because of the captive woman. The woman, who was young and frail, had been found dead that morning, but in fact she had been sickly when they took her. There had been some beating and raping, but not enough to kill her. She had been sick all along, spitting blood night after night on the trail. Now she had died of her sickness, which was not his doing or his fault. As a chief, Buffalo Hump had always been touchy about the matter of captives. He expected to control the disposal of all captives. He might order them tortured or killed, he might sell them into slavery with another tribe, or he might let them live and even on occasion treat them well. The fate of a captive brought to Buffalo Hump's camp depended on reasoning Blue Duck did not understand. Even though he felt blameless in the matter of the dead woman, he was also scared. Everyone feared Buffalo Hump's angers, and with good reason. The words his father said, though, shocked him. They were not what he had expected, not at all. "You should have left Famous Shoes alone, as I ordered," Buffalo Hump said. "Now you have to leave the tribe. You can take 5 horses, but you cannot come back to my camp again. If you do, I will kill you myself." At first, Blue Duck could not believe his father meant what he was saying. Was he going to banish him from the tribe because of a little foolery with a Kickapoo tracker? The Kickapoo had not even been harmed. Blue Duck had fought bravely on the Great Raid, killing several Texans in close combat. No young warrior had done better on the Great Raid, or fought more bravely. He said as much, but Buffalo Hump merely stood and looked at him, a chill in his eye. "We didn't hurt the Kickapoo," Blue Duck said. "We merely teased him a little. I thought Slow Tree might want him, but he didn't, so we let him go." Buffalo Hump didn't change expression. He was not interested in arguments or explanations. He had his big lance in his hand. "Slow Tree heard me tell you to leave the Kickapoo alone," Buffalo Hump said. "He did not want to assist you in your disobedience. Now I am telling you to go. You have never been obedient, and I have no time to argue with you or to correct your ways. If you stay, I will kill you soon, because of what is in you that will not obey. You have courage, but you are rude. Take the 5 horses and go away now. Any warrior who sees you near this camp after today has a duty to kill you." Blue Duck had not expected such a terrible judgment to fall on him so quickly. Yet it had fallen. Though he didn't really like many people in their band, it was the camp where he had always lived. He had always been where the tribe was. His roaming had seldom lasted more than a week. When he could not kill game, there would be food in the camp. He felt a terrible anger at the Kickapoo for having brought such a judgment on him. The next time he saw Famous Shoes, he would kill him. And he would also like to kill Slow Tree, the fat chief who had been unwilling to torture Famous Shoes merely because Buffalo Hump had forbidden it. But he could not think much about such things. Not then, when his father still stood before him. He had his rifle in his hand. Perhaps he should shoot his father right there. But he didn't shoot, or do anything at all. As always, when confronting his father, he felt a weakness in his legs and his belly. The weakness paralyzed him. He knew that if he tried to raise his gun and shoot, Buffalo Hump would be quicker. His father would shove the big lance into him. Blue Duck thought of murder, but did nothing. Buffalo Hump watched his son for a minute, and then turned away. A little later he saw the boy ride out to the horse herd to select his 5 horses. He looked dejected, but Buffalo Hump did not relent. He had returned home tired, only to have to listen half the night to stories of Blue Duck's bad behavior. The boy had beaten Hair on the Lip severely, though he had no right to. Hair on the Lip was still sore and could not move well. Also, Blue Duck had followed Lark when she went into the bushes to make water and had spoken to her rudely. Also, he had raced a fine young horse that belonged to Last Horse's father. In the race, he put the horse off a cut bank and it broke both its front legs. Of course, it had to be killed and eaten. The old man was indignant and wanted a high price for the horse that had been lost. Buffalo Hump had never been able to like his son, and now he wanted to see him gone. He had never been obedient to the Comanche way and never would. The Bluecoat soldiers would be coming onto the Llano to fight them soon, in a year or 2. Buffalo Hump didn't want anyone in the camp who was only disposed to make trouble, as Blue Duck had. Soon word of the banishment spread around the camp. Buffalo Hump was with Lark for a long time. When he came out, he discovered that the men and women who came to visit him were more cheerful. All of them approved of what he had done. A few brought him new stories of Blue Duck's bad behavior, mostly with women. Buffalo Hump was not especially disturbed by these stories. Many young warriors strutted too much with women and were not careful about marriage customs. He himself had almost been banished in his youth because of his lusts. Later that day, Fat Knee came hesitantly up to Buffalo Hump. It seemed that Blue Duck wanted Fat Knee to accompany him into exile. Blue Duck planned to go north and east into a territory where renegades and exiles from many tribes gathered. There were slavers there and bandits. They watched the Arkansas River and picked off people who traveled in boats or freighters who hauled goods in wagons. Blue Duck told Fat Knee they would soon be rich if they joined the renegades, but Fat Knee was hesitant. "Isn't he gone yet?" Buffalo Hump asked. "No," Fat Knee said. "He is still looking at the horses. He wants to take the best 5. A wind had come up. Sand was blowing through the camp. It had been warm for several days, but a cold wind was bringing the sand. "You stay in camp," Buffalo Hump said. "I will go drive him away." He found the whole business vexing. The fact that Blue Duck was still prowling around the horse herd was annoying, so annoying that Buffalo Hump caught his own horse, took his lance, and immediately rode out to the horse herd. Blue Duck's delay was merely one more example of his disobedience. Buffalo Hump thought it might be wiser just to kill the boy. Talking to him that morning, his arm had tensed twice, as it did when he was ready to throw his lance. But he had held off. Exile should be enough. But now the boy had angered him by not leaving. When he reached the horse herd, the only person who was there was Last Horse. One of his mares had just foaled, and he was watching for a bit to see that no coyote slipped in and killed the foal. "I thought Blue Duck was here," Buffalo Hump said. Last Horse merely pointed upward to the rim of the canyon. A rider with 5 horses in front of him had climbed out of the canyon and was following the horses along the rim. Buffalo Hump could barely see the rider through the blowing sand, but he knew it was Blue Duck leaving.